My favorite modern games are the ones that go all the way down to the wire, the razor's edge, if you will, where the last card, the last play, the last misplay is what ultimately decides who wins or who loses. And that's what you're going to see in these two games today. Just random little games and leagues, and I hope you can appreciate that sometimes you have to play to your outs. Enjoy. Game 1 of this match, opponent reveals Gigantha into Ragavan. So I'm thinking, okay, is this some type of Death Shadow, some type of Jund? Regardless, I see a Tasha's in my hand, and I think both relatively should be okay, because we're not going to see Liliana if it's Jund. So we're going to remove our Ragavan, which thankfully we found off the top, by the way. Take that in for what it is. We actually have a lot of raw mill happening right now, and I'm expecting some type of Thoughtseeds or Inquisition, which ultimately doesn't come my way, and that's probably going to be our big saving grace in this game 1 as a spoiler. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play my crab, I'm going to play out a land, mill them out a little bit more, and just get that train going. Now I see the Wrenn and 6, so I'm thinking, okay, this is not Death Shadow. This is ultimately some type of mid-range Jund, whatever you want to call it, without Liliana's, without anything like that. So aggro is what we like to see when it comes to playing Tasha's Hideous Laughter. They play the Nihil Spellbomb, we shot out the Fractured Sanity, and we're gonna go with the actual like raw mill instead of the exiling, because we want to just take out as many high CMC stuff as possible. Maybe they tutor out some things with the Urza Saga, just get things out of their deck before we throw out the Tashas for the win. They play an Orcish Bowmasters and threatening us with an Urza Saga, creating some tokens on their end, and that's perfectly fine. I'm gonna throw out a Fractured Sanity. I'm not gonna lose next turn based on what the board is right now. They have 2 cards in hand. They create a construct token, I should say, and then they create another construct token. Now we milled them out enough to the point where they don't actually have any more targets, and at this point maybe I should reveal the graveyard as well. With a Pithing Needle out stopping our Field of Ruin, which we decide to draw right now, we are not going to Field of Ruin them. We're just going to play out our Field of Ruin as a land per turn, then ultimately cast our Tasha's Hideous Laughter, and then hold up our Drown. But we won't need to do that when our opponent has 0 cards in library. They do have 2 cards though, just in case they have the main board, 1 of Endurance. We have the Drown available. They don't. Let's go to game 2. Up a game against mid-range, which is actually great, not one of our favored matchups, and our opponent goes off of a Blood Crypt and no Thoughtseize or Inquisition, which is a good sign. We have the Subtlety available for any creatures that come our way. We kept a 1-lander with the Preordain, ultimately showcasing why card selection is king. We find 2 fetches, put both to top. We're feeling good. The Archive Trap is going to have a lot of value against a 3-color deck. We did top deck it after they fetch, so not great there. They're going to play an Orcish Bowmasters. I'm going to Subtlety that thing because we can't have that result. I can block 1, but I can't have the army getting bigger and bigger with subsequent Orcish Bowmasters. So at this point, we go back to our turn. We are going to start laying out the threats, laying out our plan to ultimately win this game. Ruin Crab, and ultimately if this Ruin Crab gets destroyed, it's fine because we've milled enough cards with a Drown and Loch and really counter anything, destroy anything. We bring in our Watery Grave, tap, pass to our turn. Our opponent has a Ragavan, some lands, and randomly a Curse Totem, and that's when I look up at my opponent's deck count and their hand count and realize they boarded in their whole sideboard, which is why they're stuck on lands, stuck on options. This is a showcase to why certain decks cannot sideboard in their whole sideboard and do something profitable. Titan can, and certain other high land strategies, maybe control, whatever, but ultimately you can't be doing that against mill as a constant option. We let the Inquisition go to take our Drown. You can see the fact that I have an Archive Trap, so have fun fetching in the future. And at this point, it's our game to lose, really, and it gets down pretty close. We fetch, bring in a Watery Grave. We have a Fractured Sanity, which is great. I'm going to choose to play a land and ultimately not cast our Fractured Sanity. I want to hold up our Drown. I'm waiting for 1 more land. I don't need to get super hasty. They find a 3rd land. They play an Engineered Explosive, which is fine with me because it kills my crabs, but also kills Ragavan if they find another one. So that's perfectly fine. I have to deal with Goyf if that happens, but at this point I'm looking for a 5th land as well, which is great. I find the Field of Ruin, and at this point I'm going to cast my Field of Ruin, hitting their Blood Crypt, and before they can bring a Pithing Needle down, might as well get out some of my basics, activate my Archive Trap here at end step, and then be able to hold up the Drown in the Loch, which is great. Next turn I can Fracture Sanity and do what I want there. Now, counter the Orcish Brewmasters because Engineers does not kill that, and I can't have them with a constant threat. They play a Pyrite Spellbomb just to cycle, which is absolutely chef's kiss. You talk about it, but we start to see where the 15 cards brought in, I should say, actually has some relevancy. Now, I actually missed sequence here. I honestly should have Fractured Sanity them first, then hit them with the Field of Ruin, because then I might have been able to mill over that basic mountain, ultimately preventing them from getting any land here. So just remember that I had enough mana there. I really didn't need to do that first. Just small little play, could it have mattered? We'll see at the end of this game. They play Alpine Moon for any future Field of Ruins, which, you know, makes sense. They have a stomping ground, but it is one of their more relevant cards to hit. Like, they could hit Shelldock Isle, which is another option, but I think they realize most mill lists do not play Shelldock Isle, and that's perfectly fine. We play our, well, we don't play anything, I should say. We keep our Ruin Crab is what I meant to say, because we don't have any land to use with it. So we take a Thoughtseize out of their hand, which is great. That's a Thoughtseize that won't be taking a Drown in the future, or another mill spell that whatever happens that I keep in my hand, that is a card that will not take that. I'm going to hold my Archive Trap until the end of their turn, or as late as possible, really, because I want to make sure that they are using their spells, their hand disruption. I'm baiting their action against my cards. Now, they go to play a Mishra's Research Desk. I go Archive Trap in response, just because, you know, now they've committed to exiling a card off the top of their library. That's another card gone. They've exiled 2 cards. A land goes and a Ragavan happens as well, which is kind of really sad, actually. I just pretty much milled them into a threat, and this Ragavan's going to go really, really far. But I'm at 16 life. They're at 9 cards in library. We just need another card or 2 to go the mile. Now, this is where the frustrating part happens. Now, I draw a Hedron Crab. What do I do with it? I play it because I need a blocker. I need to force spells out of their hand. Hopefully they don't have a removal spell, and if they really want to destroy this, they're going to have to lose their Alpine Moon and Ragavan, so they're not going to do that. A Hedron Crab can hopefully just block. Not in this world. With a Fatal Push in their hand, they're going to hit us with a Ragavan, and we find a Hedron Crab, but they find a Tasha's. Okay, they have a Tarmogoyf. So we lose our Tashas. I top deck a Preordain. And so what I decide is like, okay, I'm going to go for the win here. I Preordain, I see a Polluted Delta and a Drown of the Loch. I put both to the bottom, and I find another Polluted Delta. Now, a lot of people might have actually kept the Drown of the Loch here for the Tarmogoyf. Now, I don't want them to draw into another threat. I'm not exactly dead here, and I just wanted to go for the win. I don't think this deck is playing Veil of Summer against me. I'm going to make that call. Ragavan takes another Tasha's. Ooh. This is getting aggravating. They play their Jagantha. It's pretty much lethal next turn. Can I find the card? I do. Fractured Sanity all the way down to the last card. Sometimes you just gotta be lucky. It's better to be lucky than good. Let's hop into match number 2. Match number 2 is actually a tough one. Our opponent goes Spire Bluff into Ragavan. We do not have a removal spell for it, but of course we do. Of course we're going to top deck the removal spell. Now we fetch Shock, take out the Ragavan, and they go Spire Bluff Canal into Ragavan, so I'm thinking, yeah, it is going to be Murktide. I'm going to take out the Murktide, Surgical that away, and I see that they don't actually have another land, so it's going to be my game to take advantage of here. Now, I don't want to feed the Dragon's Ray Channeler too much. They do have a fair amount of stuff in their hand. I'm actually going to show that right now, so the Unholy Heat is gone in that case. We lose our Crab as well, but at this point, the Channeler is just swinging at us for 1. I don't really want a Fractured Sanity to feed that to increase their clock, so I'm just going to keep playing lands tapped and go. Just let them do their thing. They have another Dragon's Ray Channeler. They may as well just play it out to increase their threat density here, but they also may want to hold up their Spell Pierces. Now, they're probably not going to fetch. The deck is relatively fetch light, so the Archive Traps are going to be dead unless I can find some type of hit with the Field of Ruin. Now, they force a negation of the Fractured Sanity, which is really interesting. I guess they're really trying to find a land. Now, I Surgical the Force a negation, and I find that, look, ultimately, it looks like they're going to find their way through us here. They have an Unholy Heat. They found us, you know, they pitched the Spell Pierce, and they Preordained to find a land. They have enabled their 3/3s, their clock. We find our Field of Ruin, and this is where things get really tricky. Now, thanks to the fact that they have a Spell Pierce, this actually becomes almost unwinnable thanks to the mana distribution here. I Archive Trap. I essentially need a Visions into an Archive Trap, and I don't do it. So the Archive Trap would have allowed me to, again, play it for free. I would have been able to pay the 2, but let's hop into a game 2. Our post-board matchup actually is better than our game 1. Let's see how we fare. Obviously, we're on the play here, and the hand actually is pretty good. We have an Extirpate available to us. I'm not actually playing any Surgicals. The Extirpate is there for value against a certain target, and then we have our Spell Pierce as well. Now, notably, I could have just held up Spell Pierced here. I kind of wanted to see if they had the removal or wanted to enable that. Unfortunately, they had the Lightning Bolt, and it wasn't really a kind of unholy heat, which is what I was hoping for, but fine, that's me being greedy right there. Now I play out the land, I play the Fatal Push just to play around the Spell Pierce there. I play the land first, and that's successful. That lands, that's great. If they want to force, that's more than fine with me. I'm happy to play that Spell Pierce exchange. In this case, they play out another Ragavan. I'm actually going to Subtlety this because I don't have the removal and I'm so low on resources at this point. And wow, this game is... I'll tell you what, this game is going to be the definition of playing it close. Now, I play the Rune Crab, they counterspell it. I return, I extirpate first to take out the counterspell. I honestly should have returned the Otawara first because I believe they returned the Ragavan to the top of their library. I wouldn't have been able to mill that over, then extirpate the counterspell. And extirpating counterspell is actually going to matter really, really like a lot here. So they play out a Murktide as a 6/6 here, and we go to our turn. We are then going to cycle a Fractured Sanity, find a Hedron Crab, and move on from there. We're not exactly dead yet. We're still at 20 life, actually, considering how far this game has gone. They have 2 cards left in hand, and this is where things get really, really sticky. Now, I find a Flooded Strand. I'm going to mill them out. I'm going to try and punish them on what they have and really just go as deep as possible, get as much value with this Hedron Crab as possible, because I need to enable any Drown in the Loch that I find as well. I'm going to Field of Ruin their lands, thin them out on red sources as much as possible, and thin out my deck of top deck lands. That's exactly what I do not want to see. Now, remember that this deck doesn't actually play any basic mountains, so there are situations where if you manage to take them out of their red sources, that is really relevant, but they're going to Unholy Heat my Crab, and at this point, it's a 2-turn clock, and I find the Ensnaring Bridge. So I'm going to go to play the Ensnaring Bridge, and at this point, I actually know, based on what they have in their hand, that their hand is a Spell Pierce and an Otawara. This was way back when I hit them with an Extirpate. So I know the Otawara is available to stop me. They play the Ragavan, and that's essentially lethal there. But I do manage to top deck something really interesting here, and that's the Subtlety. Now, I do want to pause here and say that usually what most people would do is actually play the Subtlety and block the Ragavan, but that leaves you open to dying to Lightning Bolt. In this case, you're going to see me actually resuming the game right now, play the Subtlety. They're going to Otawara here to return the Ensnaring Bridge. I'm actually going to play the Subtlety and block the Murktide region. Now, this doesn't ultimately deal with their board, but it forces them to find another answer to Ensnaring Bridge, which I just hope they don't have. They have a mystery card plus a spell snare. I'm going to Subtlety and block the Regent. Then again, this puts me up to a higher life total at 5, which gives me a lot more flexibility to fetch if I need to thin out my deck, get some crab triggers. They Ragavan to steal a Polluted Delta off the top, which is great. That's fine. And I'm going to play my Ensnaring Bridge again. They don't have a Spell Pierce, which is a big dodge. And they don't have the counter spell because I extirpated it out. So you want to play to these type of outs. What is the long game that you're thinking of? You can play around Spell Pierce because that requires mana. You can't really play around Dispels, or Mystical Disputes are a little harder as well. But Mystical Dispute doesn't really hit the Ensnaring Bridge. In this case, it would. Regardless, back and forth, I managed to find the kind of scenario that I wanted to craft. So Fractured Sanity is going to mill them for 14. There are 10 cards left in library. I have 0 cards, so that Ragavan is not really anywhere near hitting me at all. And I know that from the Extirpate, they're not playing Blood Moon, so I can get greedy with my mana base if I need to. And at this point, I can Polluted Delta top deck anything. Now, I actually decided to keep both of those. I find an Ensnaring Bridge and an Archive Trap. I play the Ensnaring Bridge because if they do happen to find a bounce spell, they have to deal with both of the Ensnaring Bridges, which honestly they can't. That's not what Murktide does. Murktide doesn't play Echoing Truth. It plays single target bounce. So they can't beat the Ensnaring Bridge, but they can beat me on life, I believe. Now, I have the Archive Trap. I'm going to go to their turn to force them to use mana on their turn. At this point, fetch before they go to their draw to decrease their chance of finding a counterspell on their upkeep. I'm going to hit them with an Archive Trap. Do I have it? Yes, I do. Let's go to their draws. Let's go to game 3. Game 3, we have, again, a pretty good matchup post-board. Now, this is a very similar hand to what we had in game 1, but unfortunately, we did have to mulligan. Our opponent does mulligan as well, which is nice. They play a Dragon's Rage Channel. They're able to kind of enable the graveyard a little bit, and that's fine. We have a Fatal Push. We are going to be able to stop some things happening on our opponent's side, but with 4 cards in graveyard already, things get a little bit tricky. So they put the 5th card in there. They're going to play out a Murktide. This is actually a really aggressive Murktide, but a great call from our opponent because I can't drown that. Regardless of that being a 3/3, That's pretty low to the ground. Even if I play Ensnaring Bridge, I'm going to be taking some hits for a little bit. So I have to Field of Ruin really aggressive here just to put cards into their yard. Now that's one card. I need 6 more at this point for the drown, but hitting the Steam Vents is relevant again because that takes them off of cards like Lightning Bolt, cards like the Unholy Heat. If I find a crab and I am able to mill them, the crab's going to stick around a little bit longer, but they probably have a lot more counter magic. Now, find a Preordain, I got to keep digging. I don't want those lands. I find an Archive Trap, which again, it's not a deck that tutors at all. So again, it highlights where Preordain is better than Visions in this case. Card selection is king instead of just raw cards in a deck like this, where quality matters over quantity. But at this point, we're just not finding the quality draws that we need. So I'm going to go to their turn on their upkeep, hardcast the Archive Trap, force them to use their mana before they draw their spell. They spell pierce me and they find their fetch. And not like they're going to fetch anyway. They don't want to increase the amount of cards in their graveyard for my drawn and lock. My opponent's actually playing this really, really well. So I got to give them the kind of highlight for that. I actually do end up going on a bit of a knife's edge decision later on, but we're going to come to that, which is going to ultimately decide how I deal with this Murktide. They Mystical Dispute my second Archive Trap. They hit me for 3 again. It is now a 2-turn clock, notably, and they do have the fetch into the red source if they need to. Now, I have Visions of Beyond, I draw an Otawara, and I think this is where I make my mistake. I should have played the Hedron Crab and just played out the Otawara from there, held up Spell Pierce, held up Drown. I would have been able to put 6 cards in there. If they fetch once or try to remove the crab, then they can't get anywhere with it. So what I could then do is, well, kind of find a way to kill it and then protect it with Spell Pierce from there. Now, I bounce the Murktide, which is my mistake. I forgot that now Murktide actually comes back not as a 3/3 anymore, but as a 5/5 because there's 2 instant sorceries in their graveyard. So this was my ultimate mistake. I would have drawn a Subtlety, which I would have been able to block with potentially. If they go to remove it, I would have been able to Spell Pierce. Again, ultimately speaking, there is so much kind of interaction back and forth that would have happened here. It could have come down very close depending on the decision they made. I could have ultimately still lost, but again, bouncing the Murktide was still the mistake here. I still wanted to highlight it because it was a mistake. It may be something that you make in the future. Just remember that ultimately you can get tunneled into what you're seeing on the battlefield. Me, my brain droning that this is a 3/3. No, when it comes back, it's going to come back as a 5/5 because of the instant and sorceries in there. You have to consider every single piece when you're making these decisions, especially when it comes to game 3s, close to the end game, whatever it might be. But ultimately, GG's. You played it really well, Max C 22314, whatever it is.